Hello. Welcome back to another section of Mapping the Edge by Sarah Dunant. We are a bit past the halfway point at this point. So if you are just joining us, hi, I'm Julie. We read books over here. We've got this one going right now. You can go back a few sections, get caught up from the start. And you can subscribe so you can catch the rest of the book and our upcoming reads. There's also a lot of other books that I've done on the channel, so check those out. But anyway, this I think is going to be a slightly longer section than the last few because I don't want it to be more than a 12-section book. So we are going to just kind of power through for these next few sections. They're going to be just a little bit longer, but we are going to start today on page 169, and it is starting with Away, Saturday p.m. Let's get into it. She was sitting cross-legged on the bed, the sheet draped around her shoulders. The room had cooled down with the dark, or maybe she no longer had the heat of his body to rub up against. She looked at her watch, 9:20 p.m. In the restaurant, he would have finished his drink and be thinking of food. For once, she felt like making him wait. She dialed the number again, but this time, when it connected, all she got was the engaged tone. Maybe Lily hadn't put the receiver back on the hook properly. It wouldn't be the first time. The conversation between the two of them had been easy, peppered with tales of swimming lessons and fun fairs, until that was the last few moments when Lily had somehow picked up a shadow in her mother's voice and responded to it by suddenly wanting her home again. Anna had tried to jolly her out of it, but had been undermined by the catch in her own throat, and the call had ended a little abruptly. Now she wanted to check that everything was all right. She redialed. Still the sharp, persistent, engaged signal. "Oh, Lily," she said under her breath. "It's not a toy, sweetheart. You have to remember to put it back properly." She thought of home and everyone gathered together for Saturday night. How fitting that Stella should have chosen this weekend for a visit. They hadn't talked to each other in 2 or 3 weeks. Was that why she'd come? To check up on her? Maybe she should have told them what was going on, Stella or Paul. An affair with a married man would hardly have offended Paul's morality. In the past, the two of them had had a history of such confessions, embroidering tales of sexual fiasco to make each other laugh over late-night glasses of brandy. But since the arrival of Mike, their previous easy camaraderie, their intimacy without intimacy, had faded a little. And so she had said nothing to him about Samuel, and he in turn hadn't been aware enough to ask. With Estella, the reasons were more complex. Like many best friends, they were very different. Anna's spontaneous, often irresponsible style, complementing Estella's deliberately defensive one. But at root, for all her unpredictability, she, Anna, had always been the stable one, able to earth the painful detachment of a friend who had lost her mother at the age of 10 and coped by closing down on all other offers of intimacy. Over the years, the intensity of their friendship had been a surprise and a delight to them both. It had only been shaken once, during Anna's affair with Chris and the fallout that followed it. Then Anna had no longer been the buoyant one, and her despair had proved dangerously contagious. So much so that when she had taken the train north without telling anyone, it had partly been Estella's overwhelming, almost panicky concern that she had needed to get away from. Of course, she had never told Stella. It would have hurt her too much, but even when she had healed herself from their relationship, had taken time to recover, and the remaining scar tissue left Anna wary of telling her best friend absolutely everything, particularly when that everything included a married man whom she already knew she wasn't going to resist. This thing between her and Samuel had all happened so fast anyway. What had started out as a joke, a drunken Saturday evening spent exploring the Lonely Hearts column, had, by the end of the week, turned into an article sold to a features editor fretting about her paper's reach into the 30-something market, not to mention barrenness of her own love life. What if I decide I want to go to bed with one of them? Anna had asked her with a gentle cruelty. All the better, so long as you change the names and it doesn't turn into a date rape piece. Nobody cares about those kinds of stories anymore. But Anna had already known she wouldn't sleep with them. Their voices had told her that the first night. Something about the mix of supplication and arrogance in the tone. Still, she had entered into the spirit of things and left a few lively, encouraging messages. The take-up had been such that she had to get Patricia to babysit twice that first week. She had met them both in one of the less flashy restaurants of Soho over the course of 2 evenings. Both of them were nice guys, but boring copy. One, a divorced civil servant who, it emerged, very much wanted kids but didn't seem that interested in the woman he'd have to live with to get them. The second, a self-employed heritage consultant who had dropped out of the rat race but had recently grown tired of staring at the computer screen in his South London semi and was looking for a way to get out and meet people again. She, in turn, had arrived with a bag full of alternative lives to play out, but to her credit, she had realized quickly there was no point in lying about all of it. That to write the article at all, she had to feel something, and to feel something, she had, at least in part, to expose herself. So she used what she could, which was Lily, her house, and her friends, and she turned the journalism into part-time English teaching at a local sixth form college. A full life, but not without its fault lines, she had thought as she unfolded it carefully before them. The evenings had played out with remarkable similarity. In both cases, they had set out their stalls and admired each other's fruit. But it became clear early on that no one really wanted to buy, not wanting or willing enough to take the risk of what felt in some way like soiled goods. In both cases, the conversation had started to flag toward the end of dessert, and they skipped coffee, splitting the bills and saying their goodbyes respectfully while still at the table, thus allowing them to leave separately. She had written them up in her head as she drove away. Later, she found herself quietly depressed, as if the world were shot through with thin veins of sadness, not the dramatic stuff of tragedy, but the small everyday pain, enough to cause slow poisoning in the most balanced of people over the course of a lifetime. Thank God for Lily, she had thought fiercely. She burns brighter than any of them. But that night, as they lay tangled together in bed, she had a sudden image of her daughter all grown up and striding out of the house, independent, complete, a profound silence growing up in the wake of the door slam. Sentimental shit, she thought, as she went downstairs to get herself a glass of wine. By the next morning, she rang the soulmates line and left a message of her own, funky, almost angry, rewriting Marvel's coy mistress sentiments to throw down a gauntlet to the opposite sex. When she listened to it, she realized with a slight shock that although it was fake, it was at the same time real. At least it would make for a better article. Only men wanting to buy need apply for this one. Welcome back to the Anna who took risks and wasn't bothered with consequences. She rang it herself next weekend to check it was in. Amid breakfast chaos and the scramble to make swimming lesson on time, it sounded outrageous, almost drunk. By Monday night, she had had 6 calls, life stories, sad chat, a flash of bravura here and there. His had been number 4. It was not like any of the others. Hi, I'll tell you what I think, all right? I think this whole exercise has got more to do with the voice than the content. Okay, so I know not everybody is their voice. You old enough to remember Tara's stamp? Or maybe you're more the Julie Burchill generation. But they're the exceptions who prove the rule. So while you may or may not be what you say you are, your voice has got something about it. No doubt you'll have already formed your own impression of mine. Either way, I would suggest we give each other a get-out clause. There's a restaurant on the top of the Oxo Tower on the South Bank where the food isn't worth the money, but the view is good. I'll be eating there on Tuesday of this week at 9 p.m. Table 110. I've already booked it. You should come. You could come and have a look, and if you like what you see, you could sit down. If not, don't bother. There's nothing lost. You could have a drink and appreciate the skyline. Who knows? You might meet someone else. I won't ever know if you came or not. No one can miss what they've never had, eh? Though sometimes I think I already do. Good hunting. He would, she thought, as she listened, make a great article. She dressed down and was deliberately late. She parked the car on Waterloo Bridge and walked along the river bedside, the concrete sprawl of the National Theatre's new extension. It was one of the first really hot days of summer, and there were people out everywhere walking and drinking, pretending they were living in Paris, the Thames doing its sluggish best to fit in with the illusion. The walk had reminded Anna of how much she liked the city. Its chutzpah, the way the 80s had reinvented it, teaching it how to pose. It had been a while since she had felt so benign toward it, so willing to play. At the top of the tower, the bar had thinned out from the after-work crowd, but the restaurant was buzzing. The diners got the prime view, St. Paul's and the city. The drinkers had to make do with new business developments and the occasional run of lights. Blade Runner it was not. Table 110 was next to the window. The waiter was keen to take her there himself, but she insisted she go alone. She wove her way through until 110 and its inhabitant were clearly in view. Because she had not allowed herself to feel anticipation, it seemed unfair that she now experience disappointment. He was tall and well-dressed, and at a generous estimate, he might soon be celebrating his 26th birthday. It was less that he was bad-looking than that he was unformed. The smooth bits and the creases more like the ones from the original packing case than the results of any real living. His neck, she noticed, had a prominent Adam's apple. It was hard to believe that that voice could emerge from such a narrow tunnel. He looked up, and it was clear that he was waiting for someone. She turned quickly and managed not to catch his eye. She retreated to the bar. The wine came in a tall glass with a cool little OXO logo imprinted on it. She glanced back at him. Was it his age or his face that made him creepy? Since when did good looks guarantee good sex, except in the movies? And who said she had to sleep with him anyway? This was about getting copy, not getting laid. She had a commission to deliver 3,000 words on the dangers of the lonely hearts culture. What the hell was she doing deciding not to meet him, now that she'd come this far? She felt as if she had caught herself out in some kind of lie, though she wasn't exactly sure what it was. She started to construct a different kind of piece, refashioning her disappointment into something witty and clever, laughing at herself, then willing herself to be surprised. She slid off the stool and turned back toward him. He was on his feet too, but not, it appeared, for her. Between the tables, a small young woman with a mass of curly red hair was striding toward him. His smile grew wider to meet her, and the narrowness of his neck seemed less of a problem. They kissed in a way that made it clear they had been there before, and she sank into the seat opposite. At the bar, Anna stood holding her drink for a second, completely nonplussed. All I can think is that he must earn more than I do. It was the voice. She looked down and registered a guy sitting along from her at the bar with a book in his hands. She caught what might have been the word redemption on the cover, but she was too busy trying to read the man to bother with the full title. Table 110, right? He made a grimace. Meant to be, yes. He was not as tall as his voice, but there was a chunky, solid feel to him. He had cropped dark hair flecked with gray and a big face that had done a lot of laughing and some of the other. Nothing to set the world alight, but there was something about the eyes that made it clear he didn't give a toss about that. Not another rewrite, she thought, not yet. Without realizing it, she wrapped the cloak of work around her a little tighter. Disguise. The great trick of it is that in the right circumstances, it can allow one to be even more oneself. I thought you said you booked it. I did, but obviously his influence is greater than mine. I gather it was an anniversary. Of what? What do you reckon? The first time he wore long trousers, or the first time he took them off? She glanced over at the two of them. They were smiling at each other. Oh, I think he's already taken them off, she said. Don't you? He frowned. I'm surprised she's interested. If you were her, would you be? She shrugged. Well, I was, and I wasn't. Or were you too caught up in your book to notice? But that's not the point, she said quietly. You're not looking properly. It's not about sex. It's about love. Oh, love. And the way he undressed the word made it clear he didn't have a lot of time for it. No wonder I didn't get the table. He paused, holding her eyes. Did get another one, though, unless, that is, you'd prefer to stay drinking. She looked out at the two views. On one side, St. Paul's, luminous, almost airborne on its floodlights. On the other, scaffolding and 80s office blocks. You lied about the view from the bar, you know. He sighed. I think lied is a bit strong. Let's say I exaggerated a little. The food will make up for it. I promise. Once at the table, he seemed to lose interest in her, more focused on the menu and the art of getting the meal right. Anna, being largely bored by cuisine and its elevated place in modern culture, chalked up his first black mark. Great opening, no follow-through, she thought, knowing that she would remember some, but not all, of the running commentary when she came to put it down later that night. She looked at him, looking at the menu. They were, at least, on first-name terms now. Samuel, not long for Sam, no doubt. No second names yet. But at least this way she hadn't had to lie. She already wondered about him. He glanced up. Sorry, this won't take long. She shrugged. He went back to work, evidently a man who was used to being indulged. Monstrous confidence. The waiter came, and they chatted together about the finer points of the braised lamb. She sat sliding her fingers up and down the wine stem. Maybe this impresses some women, she thought. So, he said, business finally complete. Here we are, voice to voice. How shall we start? We could do work, past relationships, present ones, or top 10 favorite movies. Do you have a preferred itinerary? Yes, monstrous confidence. But at least it wasn't boring, yet. She gave a short laugh. How many times have you done this before? Well, more often than you, obviously, he said, smiling. Which is why I've changed my tactics. What? Voice over content? No. Substance over small talk. The cooking time of the lamb notwithstanding. He shrugged. It costs an arm and a leg here, and not everything on the menu is worth it. I wanted to make sure we got the best we could. Anyway, it's done now. So, was it flirt or serious? What? Your message. I thought you could tell from the voice. So did I. On the tape you said you had a life, but that you could do with another one, though not all the time. Yes, she said evenly. Well, that's more or less how it is. Does that mean you're married? No. Kids? Yes. How many? One. You want to tell me any more? A girl, 6.5. Lily. Lily. Nice. Does her father help support her? No, she said, her irritation showing for the first time. I do. So he's not in the picture. Tell me, Samuel, what do you do for a living? Boring. We decided against that. Excuse me, you decided. He paused. I sell art. 2 companies. How interesting. No, it's not, he said abruptly. He sat back in his chair. Would you like to start this again? The remark took her aback. I don't know. How far back could we go? He shrugged. Well, we've ordered. We wouldn't want to do that again, since it was almost certainly when the problem started. I am right, yes. That is when you got pissed off, isn't it? She gave an exasperated laugh. Let's just say it was a little dull after the opening. I know, he sighed. Food, my great failing. I have to say I like it almost as much as sex. You eat regularly, do you? She said dryly. Yep, but there's always room for more, he said, and this time he grinned, showing off those laugh lines at their best. I bet this has them eating out of your hand, she thought, or maybe using their mouth elsewhere. Nevertheless, she was not having a bad time herself, although if she had thought about it, she wouldn't have been completely sure whether that was professional or personal. So, how about you, Samuel? Are you married? He nodded. Yes, I am. Children? No, no children. How long have you been together? 8 years. That's a long time. Is it successful? More or less. So is this the less bit? Not really. He frowned. Listen, in your message you made it clear you weren't looking for a husband. I'm not. Good. She laughed. Why? What are you looking for? Same as you, I hope, he said quietly. He broke off to fill her glass and then his own. I'll tell you how it is. I live abroad, in France, but I have to spend a couple of days in London every month on business, and during that time I feel, well, far away from home, almost as if I were another person. I like that feeling. It makes me, I don't know, more whole. He paused, in case she wanted to add something, but she didn't speak. Last year I had an affair with a woman I met on a plane coming over. It lasted 2 months. I enjoyed her company, and I was sorry when it ended. I've been rather hoping that I might do it again. And you thought the dating ads were a good way to find someone? As good as any, yes. She gave a little shrug. Well, at least that's honest. I am, he said, looking straight at her. Honest, that is. Honestly. For some people it makes up for a lack of morality. Not for all, though. Gauntlet down. He gave a wry smile. Listen, as far as I'm concerned, there are no rules, okay? So, if this isn't what you wanted, if it's too much or too little, then you can call it quits anytime you feel like it. She stared at him for a moment. Though his words were cynical, they hadn't come over that way. On the contrary, his voice had considerable warmth to it. It could be argued that she was the cynical one, writing it all down in her head for further use later. Thanks. I'll remember that. Who'd be expected to pay for the meal, by the way? I mean, if I walked. He grinned. Since I plan to try some of yours, I think it's fair if it's on me. She nodded. And what happens if you're the one who wants to leave? I'd eat first. He looked up at her. But I don't want to leave, that is. And if it doesn't sound too big-headed, I don't think you do either. Not yet, anyway. She stared at him, and the tiniest stab of desire registered inside her somewhere around the top of the cervix, around where the top of the cervix meets the womb. Biology, she thought, survival of the species. That's all it is, easily ignored. She took a breath. I love my daughter, she said, absolutely not intending to. I know how you feel. I love my wife. She made a little clicking noise with her tongue, but it wasn't exactly anger. I don't fuck my daughter. He missed a beat, but only one. I don't fuck my wife. He smiled. Well, not much. Not anymore. But she didn't smile back. But I have to tell you, Anna, I would really like to fuck you. Since he was too good to have made such an elementary error at this stage, he must have known that she'd be up for this, or at least not put off by it. You could easily stop now, she thought. You've got a great article here. You don't need anything more. unless there is something else here that you need or want. You don't think this could be reflex action on your part, do you? She said. You know, like hunger and then food. He laughed. I grant you it may look pathological, but I assure you it isn't. I would have no trouble leaving here alone. I've done it in the past. He paused. I warned you I was honest. What? Same table? She said, professing indignation. He gave an apologetic shrug. Last time I got number 110. She glanced in their direction. They were eating, talking, merry, busy chat, so much to say, easy, domestic, rather than vibrant, a couple, whatever that meant. And what if it's no good? She said, turning back to him. The sex, you mean? Then we'd have had a decent meal and seen the view, but it won't be no good. With the right person, I'm better at it than eating. Trust me. Trust yourself. She sat back in her chair and stretched her legs out under the table. Her foot met his. For a moment he did nothing. Then he slid his hand down and took hold of her bare ankle, slipping his forefinger under her sole and flipping off the shoe. He ran a slow, slick finger over her sole, flesh on flesh. He knew what he was doing. She couldn't claim it wasn't nice, if maybe a little corny. I've got a better idea, she said. Why don't we just miss the meal? He stared at her, and for the first time she saw him confused, watched the contest playing out behind his eyes. Even his touch grew half-hearted. Once upon a time she had been good at combining mischief and passion, something about the confidence of not being hurt. I want it back, she thought. I'm ready for it. She laughed so loudly that the neighboring table stopped to check them out. As she spoke, somewhere, somehow, something had been decided. Well, at least you didn't lie about that, she said, pulling back her foot gently, then taking pity on him. I wouldn't want us to peak too early here. He, too, laughed out loud at that one. He lifted his hand from under the table and held it out across the napkin and the knives and forks, as if greeting a business associate. So, Anna, what's your second name? Ravel, she said, with barely a missed beat. Anna Ravel. So, Anna Ravel, he said, I'm Samuel Taylor. I'm very pleased to meet you. The room had grown dark around the memory. On the bed, the phone exploded under her fingers. Home, she thought, grabbing for it. They've managed to trace the call. The restaurant was noisy, Italians doing what they do best. Hey, I'm about to go hypoglycemic here. Should I call an ambulance or the waiter? You could always call your wife, she thought, surprised by the exposed edge of irritation in herself. Start eating, she said instead. I'm almost out of here. She pulled herself up from the bed and went looking for something to wear. She dug down into the new bag and pulled out a clean top, realizing too late that it was the one she had wrapped Lily's present in. The wooden horse tumbled onto the floor, its prancing front leg hitting the tile at an angle. She heard the crack. Damn! She picked it up gently to survey the damage. The wood around the knee joint had split open on a seam. The horse still stood, but would need veterinary superglue to make it whole again. Her carelessness made her angry, as if it were a symptom of maternal neglect. She rewrapped the animal with exaggerated care and returned it to the bottom of the case. In the bathroom, as she turned on the light, a cockroach skittered across the floor and disappeared under the wash unit. Dirt in the cleanest of places. What's your problem? She said out loud. Don't you like it with the lights on? And how about you? She murmured under her breath, staring at her reflection in the mirror. What do you see? The face that looked back at her was pale, the skin almost spongy, with faint purple bruising under the eyes from sleeplessness, a woman under the influence of sexual intimacy. She thought again of home. Paul, Stella, and Mike dining in a summer's garden without her while Lily scampered downstairs to answer the phone. Was that the real risk in all of this? That opening up to a lover would mean somehow closing down on them? She had a job, a daughter, and a home, a life. She didn't need another one. Or if she did, what did that say about the one she had already got? She looked at herself again. Was the difference she saw behind or only in front of her eyes? It's just sex. If I chose, I could walk out of here and never see him again, she thought. True or false? Stupid question. Why should she have to? Was it really so impossible to have both him and them? After all, men did it all the time. The trick was to learn to keep them separate, learn how to compartmentalize. She had dug into her makeup bag and started dressing her face when the phone rang again. All right, page 183. Home, Sunday, a.m. I woke to the sound of no sound in the middle of the night. No sound, but something wrong. My first thought was that someone was in the house. My second, that it was Anna. I got up and pulled on her dressing gown quickly as I moved to the door. In the gloom of the landing, I could just make out her silhouette sitting on the top stair like a goblin, body bent over itself, arms wrapped tight around her knees. If it hadn't been such a warm night, I would have thought it was a gesture against the cold, but I knew that really she was hugging herself. Scared that I might make her jump, I called her name very softly. I could feel her attention, though she didn't reply, just shifted her head a little until it lay on her arms. I took it as an invitation and sat myself down next to her. Hi, I said quietly. Hi. Couldn't you sleep? A small shake of the head. Too much fun during the day, eh? You're wearing Mummy's dressing gown, she said, her head still at an angle, but her face obscured by a tangle of fallen hair. Yes, I forgot to pack my own. I don't think she'd mind, do you? Do you want to share it? There's loads of room. Another little shake. We sat for a while. I wanted to put my arm around her, to make her feel safe inside my warmth, but I didn't know if it was the right thing to do. If I were Anna, I would know automatically. That's what being a mother is all about. You didn't hear the phone again, did you? She shook her head once again, this time abruptly. I felt a little wave of hostility coming out of her, but whether it was directed against the world in general or just toward me, I couldn't tell. How will we ever cope if Anna doesn't come back, I thought. How will we ever make it through the night? Would you like a drink? She shrugged. I waited. Do you think you might sleep better in Mom's bed? Still, nothing. Once the summer before last, when they'd been staying with me, and Anna had gone to a Midsummer Night's concert in the park, leaving me to babysit Lily, she had woken with a nightmare, something she had never done with me before, and when I tried to comfort her, she had grown dreadfully agitated, overflowing with what felt like boundless rage. I had found myself almost frightened of her. She had cried for what seemed like hours, though I know it was only 35 minutes because I kept checking my watch. Then, all at once, she had stopped and come and curled herself on my lap and fallen asleep. I was so nervous about moving her that she was still there when Anna got home. Anna had been sanguine about it. She said it happened maybe once or twice a year, and that it was only so upsetting because of Lily's usually sunny disposition. Looking into the pit, she called it. The drop went so far down you felt giddy, and all you could do was stand by and be there for her until eventually, when she was ready, she would come back, knowing you were waiting. We had talked about it for hours afterward, how almost everyone has a darkness somewhere in them, one that is born rather than made. And why should we somehow expect less depth of personality just because there have been fewer years? It had made me think again what a good mother Anna had turned out to be because she wasn't afraid of that. What a good mother, and what a good friend. Apparently, after my own mother died, It became a habit of mine to go into her bedroom in the middle of the night, a kind of sleepwalking grief, I suppose. My father would wake to find me sitting on her side of the bed, no tears, no nothing, just sitting there wide-eyed and blinking, not saying anything or responding to any of his questions. Like Anna, he had some aptitude for other people's pain. If it was a cold night, he'd put a blanket around me. Otherwise, he'd just sit with his arm around me and wait till I was ready. He would ask if I wanted to go back to bed, and eventually I would say yes. In the morning, I couldn't remember anything about it, just like I can't remember anything now. It could be that I was trying to work it out for myself, the problem of where she had gone. Same house, same room, same bed. One morning she had been there, and the next night she hadn't. Maybe I needed to test the absence for myself. In retrospect, I can't see that I was so damaged by it all. The wisdom of the time, of course, decreed that talking about it should help. I know my father took me to see somebody. I used to think I could remember the face of the woman I talked to, or rather, who talked to me, and the pattern of the wallpaper in her room. But now I think I was just embellishing details given to me later. I have no idea if the therapy did any good. As it happened, I did my own healing later in ways he wouldn't really have understood. But at least he tried. Ever since he told me about it, what must be 10 years ago now, I've had this image of children as potted plants, pushy little seedlings that need basic but regular monitoring. Forget to stake them up at the right time, give them too little or too much baby bio, and you can affect their emotional growth for years. The tyranny of Freud. I think it's one of the reasons I never wanted children of my own. Anna, luckily, has always been more phlegmatic. Her line is that potted plants survive the most appalling abuse and that children are more resilient than any of the advice books would have us believe. She would know. Maybe my mother would have known that too. If she'd stayed around longer, perhaps I would have learned it from her. If only I could remember what her loss had actually felt like, rather than just the flat, dull memories of the day-to-day living without her. Presumably, it was a way of blanking out the pain. No doubt that's what I was scared of now, that somehow the loss of Anna would tap into something even bigger in me, something that had hitherto been submerged. Was that why I chose to believe that it had been her on the phone? Because it was just too awful to contemplate anything else? You know, when I was little, I used to go and sit on my mom and dad's bed in the middle of the night sometimes, I said, looking down onto the hall beneath with the phone silent on the hall table. She liked that one. I sort of knew she would. Why? I shrugged. I don't know. To make sure they were still there, I suppose. Your mom's dead, isn't she? Yes, but she wasn't then, I said, working some swift revisionist magic to protect us both. She didn't say anything for a while. Maybe I'd scared her. Was she nice? My mom? Oh, yes, I think she was. Do you miss her? No point in lying too much. Lily would spot it anyway. Well, to be honest, I don't remember her very well anymore. Why not? Because it was a long time ago that she died. How old were you? Oh, old. I mean, much older than you. Nearly 10. 10? And you don't remember her? You must have a bad memory, Estella. I laughed. I suppose I have. She had shifted herself a little in my direction, so that now I could feel the warmth of her right leg against my own. I slipped an arm around her. She leaned into me. I felt myself go soft inside. We sat staring down into the swirling darkness of the stairwell. I thought about death, and I wanted to guide us both away from it. Don't you find it spooky sitting here on your own in the dark? She shook her head. Mummy says that the dark is only frightening because we're not cats. She said the world is full of animals that love the dark, and they have to have some time for themselves when they can catch food and play. Sensible idea. Well, she's absolutely right, don't you think? We saw a hedgehog once, on the road. When we were coming back from the cinema, it went under the car. We gave it some cat food. Did it like it? She shrugged. I don't know, it wouldn't come out. We pushed the bowl under the car. It was empty in the morning. But it might have been the cat. Yeah. The darkness had softened around us, images of Beatrix Potter overlaying those of Stephen King. I glanced at her. There would be no better time than this. It must have been nice talking to Mum this evening. She said nothing, but gave the smallest of nods. You haven't been worried about her, have you? She was silent for a while. No, but everybody else has. I laughed. Oh, we haven't been that bad, have we? She gave a little shrug. I think Paul just wanted to talk to her, which is why he was upset with you. She said to give him her love. She hadn't forgotten him. No. What did she say about me? She said, that's nice. What? I told her that you were here, and she said that's nice. Is that all? I said, and I must have let my indignation show because she squeezed my arm. She said it in a big voice like she meant it. I smiled and squeezed her back. Paul was wrong. Lily had talked to her mother. This was no elaborate child make-believe. We sat for a moment, held in the heart of the night. I imagined a campfire and a legion of little furry animals poking their noses out of the gloom. Maybe we tell children bedtime stories to keep at bay adult fear of the dark. She sounded funny, she said at last. Funny? How funny? I don't know. She gave a little shrug. When she said goodbye to me, she sounded sort of sad, like she didn't want to go. It made me cry. I tried to say something, but she wasn't there anymore, and then Paul shouted in my ear and y'all came running out, and I got scared. I felt a terrible sick lunge in my gut, as if a black hole had opened up and I was being sucked inside myself. Why is it that when the heart hurts most, it always tears at the stomach? Oh, Lily. I gave her a hard hug. Darling, she was probably just upset about missing the plane. In the gloom, I saw her squeeze her eyes together tight to stop herself from crying. It was a gesture she had perfected when she was first beginning to walk and would fall over a lot. I don't think Paul should have shouted at me like that. Oh, he didn't mean to. You know Paul. I paused. Did she hear him shout? Were you still talking to her when he came on the line? I don't know. I don't think so. But she knew you were all right, yes? I mean, she asked you how you were? Yes. And what did you tell her? I said I was fine. Fine. It was Lily's word for everything. The day, her life, school, everything. Fine. In our time, she and I have had complete telephone conversations with her finely monosyllabic. I was so impressed by the technique that I once tried it out on a business colleague. It worked quite well. Fine, in fact. But not now. I told her you'd won me a duck, she added, because she obviously thought it would make me feel better. I didn't win it. You did that. Yes, but you helped me hold the net. Did you tell her about the panda? She nodded. Well, I expect that's why she was sad. She heard about all that, and she wanted to be here having a good time with us. Yes, she thought about it. I think that's what she wanted. So why doesn't she come home? Oh, she will, darling, she will. We sat for a while. She extracted herself from my grasp. I couldn't tell what she was feeling, and I suddenly felt nervous about making a mistake. After your mum died, I mean, when you were little, she said at last, not looking at me directly, but keeping her eyes fixed on the stairs in front. Did you miss her then? Did I? I stood in my parents' room again, staring at my mother's side of the bed, the cover so smooth and shiny like still water, and for a second I felt the pit open inside me. Yes, I said. I missed her a lot. But, Lily, your mom's not going to die. She's just going to be late home. We sat for a while. Everything else I could think to say sounded fake and unworthy. I could feel her fingers fluttering in mine. Help her, Stella. Think of a way. Do you want to sleep with me for the rest of the night? I said, giving her a little squeeze. Do you think that might help? I didn't really expect her to say yes, but she did. I put my arms around her, and carried her upstairs. Page 190. Away. Sunday a.m. In the middle of the night, he unlocked the door to her room. She was lying in the bed, her hand curled around the body of the wooden horse. She was not asleep. After he had left her, she had sat replaying the encounter between them like some eager lover trying to decode deeper messages out of a first date. It didn't work. The more time she spent in his company, the more the ground moved under her feet. The less he said, the more she suspected, and the more he confided, the less she believed. The woman was real enough. The photos confirmed that. He had had some kind of relationship with her, that much was clear, but surely not the one he was claiming. The old-fashioned courtship, the happy marriage, the sad demise. Not even fiction came so sugar-coated these days. So why go to such lengths to convince her that it did? That was the strangest part. All of this, the kidnap, the captivity, the hospitality, all of it spoke of obsession, but with whom? He or a dead woman? Was she meant as a replacement or merely as a witness? It was almost as if he needed her to believe it before he could believe it himself. In some way, he didn't even seem that interested in her. He looked through her rather than at her. Did that mean he might keep his word and let her go? Would she keep hers and stay compliantly until he did? The answer to both of those questions seemed obvious. Either way, there would be little sleep tonight. The food had done its work, replacing the lost, spacey feeling of the day with a restless energy. She moved through the room again, searching for anything she might have missed. When she had exhausted the bedroom and the bathroom, she had turned out the light and lay under the covers, staring up at the ceiling, moving around the rest of the house in her head, testing doors and windows, picking her way through locks and out into freedom, while in her imagination, he slept the sleep of the disturbed, curled around bottles of developing fluid in a blacked out basement. In her mind, she kept coming back to that dark room. If he spent so much time in it, would he have gone back there now? The depth of his infatuation and the smell of his clothing suggested it might be a habitual haunt. Yet at some point, even he would have to sleep. If not there, then somewhere close enough to be able to hear her if she became troublesome in the night. The fact that he hadn't responded that first night when she tried to break down the door didn't mean that he couldn't hear, simply that he had chosen not to listen. For some reason, it seemed important for her to know where he was, to be able to place him in her mind as he could place her. So when the key entered the lock in the blackest, deepest part of the night, her panic was made all the greater from the fact that yet again she hadn't heard him coming. Did this man really know how to walk on eggshells, or could it be that he had been there all the time, waiting outside the door, his mind keeping pace with hers as it prowled its way toward freedom? The lock clicked free. Her body lit up with fear, a pulse exploding inside her head and her stomach going into spasm. Under the covers, her fingers clasped themselves around the neck of the horse. She had tried it both ways, grasping the body with the legs as sharp jabbing spikes, or using the head as a handle and the body as the cosh. This hold, she had decided, could do more damage. Somehow she managed to stop herself shaking. There was silence. Then another small scrape, as if the key was now being withdrawn. She lay rigid, waiting for the door handle to turn. What came next? If this was going to be about sex, he was going to have his work cut out for him. He could have made it easier on himself. A man who could spike coffee must have a dozen tasteful things he could do with red wine or anchovies. Yet she was wide awake now. So, was he ready to fight? Was that what he wanted? With all his talk of love among the English verbs, he seemed almost too sentimental for rape. But then, what did she know? This was her first weekend away with a psychopath. She lay and waited. Nothing happened. The door remained closed. Her fingers shivered over the wood. This time she could hear the muffled thud as his feet hit the floor. He was moving away from the door, along the corridor and down the stairs. What the hell was happening here? First he bolts her in, then waits until the middle of the night, unlocks the door, and what, just walks away again? Had he lost his nerve at the last moment? Pulled upstairs by the elevation of his cock only to find that the fantasy couldn't sustain itself through the time it took to unlock the door? She knew that couldn't be it. It had to be something else. She toyed with the idea of repentance, their romantic evening opening up a well of empathy in him, which in turn freed her and sent him running to the local priest for confession and absolution. It didn't wash. For all his talk of love and sorrow, this didn't feel like a pathology that encompassed repentance. There was only one other answer. It had to be a trick of some kind. Did he want her to wake up and find the door open so she would come and look for him? Maybe it was a test to prove her compliance, to see if she would betray their agreement and try to escape, so then he could use her broken word to break his own. In which case, she wouldn't oblige him. Black silence descended again. She lay completely still, her eyes closed, her breathing even. Outside, through the wedged open window, there was a rush of wind in the pine forest, a shimmering, rippling noise, like a wave on a beach, every particle of the sound alive with movement. In the emotional maelstrom of the last 2 days, she had found herself growing almost fond of the sound. Then she heard something else, the distinctive growl of a car engine igniting and catching once, twice in the night, revving a few times before its wheels pulled harshly across gravel, then turned out onto firmer earth and away, the noise eventually dissolving into the night. Her heart started thumping uncontrollably. There was absolutely no mistaking the story of sound that had unfolded in her ears. First, someone had unlocked her door. Then, someone had driven off into the night. It had to be him. If she had been asleep, probably neither of the sounds would have been loud enough to wake her. But she had not been asleep. She was awake, and now the door was open, and the car was gone. She thought back to the confessional booth and the man in tears for a love that had driven him mad. Whatever the answer, she couldn't simply lie there and wait for him to come back. It spoke too much of her being the victim. She got out of bed and slipped on her shoes. She had slept in her clothes, and the silk dress was scrunched and clinging to her body, its creases scoring uneven latticework on her skin. No time to change now. If she got out of the house, she would still have no passport, no ticket, and no money. It didn't matter. She could walk or hitch her way to freedom. All the rest would come after. She grabbed a jacket from the wardrobe, and with the wooden horse still clamped tight in her hand, she quietly opened the door. Nothing happened. No alarm screeched, no lights flashed, no arm shot out of the darkness to stop her. She moved to the top of the staircase. The large hall window let in slivers of light from a young crescent moon above. It broke up the dense dark, but with it came shadow and what felt like movement. She steadied herself. She could deal with this. Living alone with a child makes one an expert in night paranoia. While burglar alarms can persuade insurance companies, The imagination demands subtler protection. If Lily were here now, she would be too busy containing her daughter's fears to indulge her own. She formed her empty palm into a fist, imagining the fluttering of a smaller hand in hers. Besides, she said to herself as she walked downstairs, what was there to be frightened of? She already knew that there was no one there. At the bottom, she made straight for the front door. She slipped off the upper and lower bolts and turned the main handle. It stayed locked. She hadn't really thought it would be open, had she? That would have been too easy. Nevertheless, she turned swiftly back on herself, half expecting to find him standing behind her, mocking her naivete. After 48 hours of captivity, she was already behaving like a prisoner, nervous of freedom, guilty about moving without chains. She walked swiftly along the corridor, trying each of the doors in turn. She was tired of finding them all locked. As she turned the handle of one of them, she threw herself against the wood, using her shoulder as a battering ram. The only thing that gave was her flesh. She accepted defeat and moved toward the living room. Inside, the air was ink black. There must be shutters on the windows to create such an intense darkness. Should she risk the light? What if he was standing outside watching, waiting for some kind of sign to come back in? With her free hand, she felt her way carefully across the room to the table near the fireplace where the telephone had been. Of course, it was no longer there. He wasn't that careless. She moved quickly in the direction of the open window she had remembered from dinner, but as she turned, her hip caught the edge of the table and sent it crashing to the floor. The noise was deafening, and she heard herself yell out, losing her grip on the horse and feeling it spin away into the darkness. It was okay. It was okay. If the house was empty, then no one could be listening. Still, it increased her sense of urgency. She left the horse where it had fallen and went for the window. When she found it, not only was it locked, but there was no handle anywhere, no way to get a purchase on its wooden surrounds. She thought about picking up a piece of furniture and smashing it against the glass, but it wouldn't make any impact on the shutters outside. The place was impregnable. There was no way out. She felt shaky, as if the air had grown suddenly cold. Fear arose in goose pimples on her skin. None of this made sense. She was wandering around a darkened, empty house in which everything was locked and bolted. Why had he bothered to let her out if there was nowhere to go? Or maybe that was precisely why he had let her out, because he had wanted her to understand how total her imprisonment was, how without his consent she could never get out, even if he wasn't there to stop her. If she went back up to her room now, would he know? Would there be broken threads across doorways or footprints in flour, so he would have proof that she had roamed and tried to escape? She realized that even with him gone, she was still afraid. How was it that she had become so scared of everything? That must have been why he had singled her out. People like him made a decision in these things. There must have been dozens of English-speaking tourists with dark hair and fair skin in Florence, yet he had picked her, had detected her vulnerability across a crowded shop, as strongly as if it had been crude animal scent. She hadn't always been like this. There had been a time when she used to be able to walk on water, or at least not be frightened of drowning. But somehow, since Lily's birth, the world had become an infinitely more threatening place. She had spent so much energy protecting her daughter from life's fault lines that she had stopped appreciating the beauty of their drop, and so, gradually, had lost her own head for heights, emotional as well as physical vertigo. Well, she would never walk another cliff edge like the one she was walking now, and if she wasn't going to fall, she had better find her balance soon. She could start by believing she already had. If he expected her to escape, she would do just the opposite and stop trying. If he wanted her to become frantic, she would stay calm. If he was out to play games in the dark, she would put on the lights. She made her way back to the door and located the switch. The room burst into life, tidy, clean. The dinner things cleared away from the fireplace and the dining table, now pushed against the far wall, already laid for breakfast, with a thermos of coffee and a basket of bread rolls under a cloth that was still damp. She picked up the bread and squashed it between her fingers. It was stale. So, he was running out of fresh supplies. Was that where he had gone? Shopping in some distant 24-hour supermarket? It hardly seemed likely. It rammed home the fact that she still didn't have a clue where he might be. She started setting the room to rights, recovering the horse from where it had fallen. One of its legs had splintered at the knee joint on impact. Lily would have to bind it up. She was very good at animal hospital. Anna pushed the thought aside and moved on to the table. Nearby on the floor lay an ark of books that had obviously fallen with it. No wonder the crash had been so loud. She gathered them up. They were English paperbacks, their spines creased with use, their covers giving away their content. Well-groomed women with good-looking open faces set against exotic backdrops, romantic figures, stories to suit the upstairs wardrobe. She checked the inside covers. The last imprint on each of them was dated late 90s. So, had this been Paolo's library, now presumably meant to be hers? What did he think? That she would spend her days lounging about on the grass reading romance while he lovingly prepared the next meal? Married bliss with a captive? As she moved away, she caught a glimpse of herself in a mirror hanging to the right of the fireplace. She hadn't seen herself properly for 3 days, and the sight shocked her. She looked extraordinary, her face pale and drawn, bits of hair standing up all over the place from the bed, the red dress a creased chaos of silk. Without thinking, she brought up a hand to smooth her hair, tightening her face muscles out of their frown into an automatic half-smile. Woman's stuff. The involuntary communication between self and mirror self. Even in a crisis, it worked. She looked better, and felt better too, more in control. Immediately to the right was a portrait of Paola staring directly into the camera, also smiling. They must have been lovers by now for her to allow such an intimate exchange with the lens, both inviting and ignoring at the same time. Maybe she had liked it. She was clearly a woman who had an understanding of her own power. The mystery was why she should want to give in to him. Anna glanced back from the photo to the mirror again. Was it just obsession warping his vision, or were they really alike in some ways, the two of them? No, not when you thought about it. To start with, the woman in the photograph was prettier than she was. A broader forehead and a wider mouth, which made the smile more entrancing. Anna returned to her own image, fine-tuning the smile, trying to get it to mimic the photo, to see if she could understand what it was he might have seen in them both. Lily had once caught Anna in this mirror game, demanding to know why it was she always changed her face when she looked at her own reflection. At the time, she had been mortified, as if she had been caught in some trick of gender, guilty of inadvertently passing on the sin of female vanity to the next generation. Since then, she had spotted Lily at it herself, that shy, sly collusion with the glass, practiced for the years to come. Ah, well, she had thought, maybe it is bigger than both of us. All of us. She looked back at the photo, and suddenly she understood it. Of course. Why hadn't she seen it before? The familiarity was not about their looks, but their pose. The woman in the photograph was coming from the same place she was. The way she held her head on a slight tilt, the ghost of a smile, half coquettish, half confident. A woman playing with her own image. A woman oblivious of the camera lens. A woman looking at a mirror. Alone. She dropped her eyes so they wouldn't give away what her brain was thinking. She feigned interest in the room again, glancing casually around the walls, reading the gallery of photos differently now. In the first section, a young woman was caught going about her everyday business in public places, laughing and chatting with companions who were no longer there. As they were excluded, so she was enlarged. The devious art of the telephoto lens. In the second gallery, she was on her own, the public face now engaged in private business, charming itself, checking its own attractiveness in a mirror, subject and object at the same time. And meanwhile, the journey from the one to the other had taken place without any bride in between. No wedding shots or formal portraits, not a single photograph that showed the two of them together, no proof at all that in fact they had ever been intimate in each other's company. Paola, his dead wife, or just some interesting looking woman plucked from the crowded streets of Florence into a house, a room, and a mirror, like her, now. And that is the end of this section. Ooh, it's like so creepy. But anyway, that's the end of this section. We'll pick up next time on page 199. Hope you are enjoying this one, and I will catch you next time. Bye.